People have been speedrunning Super Mario 64 for over 20 years now, and throughout that time, people have spent unbelievable amounts of their lives grinding to beat the game just a little bit faster. However, contrary to what you would assume, these speedrunners don't even play on the fastest version of the game. In fact, the original release, the slowest version, has been seen as the only valid way to speedrun for over 10 years now. So, if speed is the goal, why would speedrunners intentionally handicap themselves? The history is complicated. Through cheating scandals and a decision made by the most influential runner in Mario 64's history, I'll answer the question. Why do Mario 64 speedrunners go slow on purpose?
You want a revolution? Well, we've got one.
The Nintendo Revolution, now known as of course the Wii, really was a revolution for gaming. But for speedrunning, what Iwata announced next would go on to have huge implications for the future of Super Mario 64.
We have designed Revolution to be a virtual console capable of downloading 20 years of Nintendo content.
Released in December 2006, the advent of the Wii Virtual Console, also known as VC, now meant players could play Mario 64 on their Wii, and this also happened to be the fastest version, by far. And though it was possible to play with an emulator on PC slightly before this, the game really began to take off around 2006. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, we need to actually understand how much time the VC and emulator save versus the original Nintendo 64. It's not perfectly straightforward. Load times, lag, and different strategies all affect the speed. Thankfully though, Tabascoth gave us nearly perfect data by using tool-assisted speedruns to play back identical gameplay with modern strategies. For 16-star, emulator saves just 9 seconds, whereas VC saves 17. But when 20 star is where VC really shines. Emulator saves 1 minute and 7 seconds, where VC saves a whopping 2 minutes and 9 seconds. If you break it down, on average, VC saves over a second per star, whereas emulator saves about half a second per star. Over the years, the game has been released for both the Nintendo Switch and the Wii U. While you might expect the more powerful consoles to run the game faster, they actually perform worse, causing them to be practically obsolete. As a result, these versions have been merged into the VC leaderboard with almost nobody using them. Super Mario 64 stands apart from most speedruns in how it handles different versions. Take Ocarina of Time for example. The community has always just accepted better versions if they come along. Throughout the history of Ocarina of Time, the N64, iQ, GameCube, and Wii VC have all been the fastest version at one point in time. In recent years, the VC version has been settled in as the most popular, but they just roll with it. So why is Super Mario 64 such an outlier here? Well, it all comes down to how different versions affect speed. Every version runs at a different speed, and emulator saves most of its time with the absence of lag and slightly faster loads, where VC also has no lag, but has the fastest loads by far, saving that extra time over emulator. These are giant differences, and most would probably say that speedrunners should play on VC, but in 2025, this is not the case. In the early days, Speed Demo's archive leaderboards would prefer Nintendo 64, but allowed submissions from VC, unaware of just how much it saved. Emulators were banned outright, leaving room for an entirely different leaderboard for those on emulators, hosted on none other than SM64.com. With SM64.com, the single-star community blossomed. Runners competed on individual stars, and they were able to use cheat codes and save states, as well as share gameplay because it was directly on the computer. Here, the controversy sort of began. Those who were on emulator had a clear advantage, even if they weren't aware of just how much it saved. This didn't necessarily discourage people from playing on emulator, but the community became extremely fragmented, and all forms of Mario 64 speedrunning declined until 2009. Yet, from this decline emerged a new community, Japanese runners who championed allowing emulators for full game runs. Japanese runners rarely played on VC for one reason. Their version was Shindo edition, This meant they couldn't do BLJs, and the load times were more similar to that of the original Nintendo 64. So for these runners, they really only had two options. They could either play on original hardware or emulator. The fastest version simply wasn't feasible to obtain. This difference between regions would soon be the reason for radical change, but not before the catastrophic summer of 2010. The community wasn't complete strangers to cheating, as from 2007 to 2009, there were scandals involving a few different cheaters, but nothing to truly shake the community like the summer of 2010. In a period from March to September, it is now known that over 40 top-level runs were cheated. While this was mostly isolated to 16-star, other categories fell victim to cheating as well. This caused the great leaderboard split of July 11th, 2010, where the Japanese leaderboard split between emulator and Nintendo 64, in hopes to combat any further cheating. In addition, even with the split, players were becoming more and more skeptical of each new record done on emulator, and the damage this one summer did to the platform is still felt to this day. By 2011, nearly all top-level runners had switched to N64, and emulator had gone nearly extinct in Japan. Over in the West, competition was actually starting to heat up. Though the West was far behind the Japanese runners by this point, the community was beginning to grow. The rise of speedruns live also helped to further this growth, as runners were doing races daily on a variety of games, including Mario 64. The creators of Speedruns Live allowed the use of any platform to race, making the barrier of entry as low as possible. So, with the ability to play on any version they'd like, VC became the norm in the West. With a Wii, they could race any Nintendo game they wanted, and though they were still unaware of just how much it saved, many weren't even able to chase the record yet. This meant they could race and improve in a race environment. They weren't going for the world record. However, one of these runners would eventually get to that level, and they were about to change everything. On June 11th, 2011, the American runner Siglemic got his first world record on VC, a 50:44. It was a solid run, but he really made a splash when on July 23rd, 2011, he set a new record of 149.05 in 120 star. This run was revolutionary, but not for the reasons you'd expect. Siglemic was on VC, and the Japanese runners were upset because they couldn't compete. Still, they didn't know exactly how much it saved, but it was easy to tell that in order to beat a 149.05 on N64, they'd need a far better run than felt possible at the time. This whole thing almost split the community in two. People were so mad. I'm just kidding. Siglemic just quietly switched to N64 like it was no big deal. No drama, nothing. He just wanted everybody to compete together, East and West. At the end of 2011, equipped with a Nintendo 64, Siglemic got a 147.10 in 120 star. This run was much better than the VC record, and Siglemic had shown it was possible to beat the Japanese runners on their own playing field. The story doesn't just end here though. The community didn't just switch to N64 overnight. People were aware that VC saved a lot, but as I keep reiterating, it wasn't clear just how much it saved. Western runners continued to play on all platforms, with all of them out of reach of Siglemic, so it didn't really matter. But runners did eventually catch up. But Siglemic put the nail in the coffin for both VC and emulator at the end of 2012. With a ridiculous 144.01 in 120 star and a 49.09 in 70 star, Siglemic had a good hold on the record. But two runners who happened to play on VC were coming for it. So it was possible the record could once again be held on VC. These two runners, Alex SM64 and Hyacinth, were ambitious to beat the record. But the community was aware that even if they did beat Siglemic, the gameplay would be very evidently worse, so it wouldn't be treated as the official record. Siglemic, however, wanted to do more than just let the community decide amongst themselves. To prove a point, before either of them could get the record, Siglemic did some runs on VC, and on February 27th, 2013, Siglemic easily beat the 70-star record with a 48.46, putting them even further out of reach. This didn't discourage Hyacinth though. and he started grinding for the 120-star record on VC. He went for the record throughout 2013, and after grinding all spring and summer, he finally beat Siglemic. A 143.37 on August 18th put him firmly ahead. But Siglemic had another point to prove, so just a day after, this happened. With Blink 182 in the background and a deliberately awful capture, he beat Hyacinth with a 143.22, and a day later, he improved the 70-star record again to a 48.28 for good measure. While this seems extremely petty, and it kinda is, Siglemic furthered the legitimacy of Nintendo 64 by setting times that wouldn't be beaten for years to come. He established that VC and emulator were sort of joke platforms, as any top runner could destroy their times if they switched to VC. That year, the leaderboards were officially split, and Nintendo 64 was, and still is, seen as the superior platform to play on. That's not to say emulator and VC runners aren't respected. I'd say over the years the elitism has gotten better, but the community still doesn't hold other platforms in the same regard. But maybe one day the emulator or VC times will be faster, who knows? These days, there's been talk in the community about a possible switch to the decomp version of Mario 64. On one side, supporters argue it could offer better customization, intro skip, and easier accessibility. But most runners maintain the original N64 hardware provides the purest experience. The added lag actually becomes part of the skill ceiling, since the game's performance fluctuates depending on the camera's positioning. Mastering lag reduction has become its own art form, another way top runners separate themselves from the rest of the pack. If anything, through nearly 30 years of speedrunning history, Super Mario 64 has never stopped evolving, and it never will. Maybe someday we'll all be running the decomp version, or maybe the N64 will stand the test of time. Nowadays, we have tons of new hardware that makes the game easier to play on N64, and it's hard to imagine with how ingrained we all are with the platform that a switch could ever happen. Runners have spent thousands on capture cards, monitors, converters, splitters, controllers, everything, all to play on the original, beautiful disaster that is the Nintendo 64. I need to give a massive thanks to Frosty Zako for his incredible research and documentation. Without his work preserving this history, so many of these stories might have been lost to time. He really is the real reason I'm able to bring these videos to you. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Mario 64 speedrunning history, you should definitely check out my other videos, you'll love them. And remember to hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day.